Imagine having absolute wealth, global fame, and the face of a Hollywood god. You would do anything to keep it, right? Not Farley Granger. In the 1950s, he was the ultimate golden boy. Millions of women worshipped him. But behind the flashing cameras, Farley was living a suffocating nightmare. He was a king on screen, yet a total prisoner in reality, forced into fake public romances just to hide the men he truly loved. Why would a massive superstar intentionally destroy his own multi-million-dollar empire? Today, we expose the brutal silencing contracts, the lies, and Farley Granger's darkest secret. Before the tailored suits and the adoring screams of millions, who was Farley Granger? Born in 1925 into a world of absolute luxury, his life was supposed to be a flawless fairy tale. But when the Great Depression violently hit in 1929, that fairy tale shattered into a million pieces. His family lost absolutely everything overnight. Imagine the sheer, suffocating terror of sudden and total bankruptcy. The once wealthy, respected family was suddenly running from ruthless creditors, hiding from debt collectors, and moving from one cheap, cramped apartment to another in the dead of night. The trauma of losing their empire broke his parents. Unable to cope, they sought comfort at the bottom of a bottle, consumed by alcoholism and despair. And caught in the middle of this chaos was a deeply sensitive little boy. Farley grew up in a domestic war zone of unpaid bills, drunken arguments, and constant instability. He learned very early on that to survive the chaos, he had to be quiet. He had to be perfect. He developed an agonizing, desperate need to please everyone around him, constantly searching for the stability and safety his parents could no longer provide. Behind the breathtaking, romantic face that would one day conquer the world, there was a deeply traumatized, terrified child who just wanted a safe place to breathe. Then, just as he turned 18, salvation seemingly arrived. The legendary Hollywood producer Samuel Goldwyn spotted this breathtakingly handsome teenager and offered him an exclusive 7-year studio contract. To an exhausted young man who had spent his entire life outrunning poverty and the shame of eviction notices, this piece of paper looked like a golden ticket sent from heaven. It promised massive wealth, ultimate security, and a way to finally rescue his broken parents from the gutter. But the Hollywood studio system of the Golden Age was not a charity. It was a well-oiled, dictatorial machine. When Farley Granger signed his name on that dotted line, he was not signing a simple employment agreement. He was signing a literal deed of ownership. He was completely selling his soul. Buried deep within those thick legal pages was the dreaded morality clause. This was not just a standard code of conduct. It was a brutal, exploitative slave contract designed to completely strip away his humanity. Samuel Goldwyn effectively bought the rights to Farley Granger's entire existence. The studio dictated who he could speak to, where he could eat, and most terrifyingly, who he was allowed to love. In a deeply prejudiced era, where being attracted to another man was considered a criminal offense and a mental sickness, this clause was a loaded gun pointed directly at his head. If Farley even showed a hint of his true self, if the studio bosses even suspected that his heart belonged to a man, they had the absolute legal power to instantly destroy him. They could freeze his bank accounts, shatter his reputation, and throw him right back into the agonizing, humiliating poverty he had just escaped. He had finally paid off his family's massive debts, but the ultimate price was his own freedom. His perfect, flawless physical beauty became his absolute worst enemy. The studio aggressively marketed him as the ultimate heterosexual romantic lead, parading him around in a beautifully gilded, suffocating glass cage. Every single step he took was closely monitored by studio fixers. Every public smile was mathematically calculated. He was trapped in an environment of constant, paralyzing fear, forced to play the role of the perfect straight man 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The sensitive boy who just wanted to save his family had unwittingly locked himself inside the most glamorous, terrifying prison on earth. Sometimes, the only way to escape a beautifully decorated prison is to walk directly into a war zone. While the ruthless studio executives were desperately busy trying to mold him into the perfect, heavily insured commodity, the entire world was suddenly thrown into the dark chaos of the Second World War. For most young men, receiving draft orders was a terrifying reality. But for Farley Granger, the United States Navy ironically offered something Samuel Goldwyn never would. It offered him a brief, fleeting taste of absolute freedom. He was stationed far away from the blinding camera flashes and the suffocating studio fixers. He found himself on the quiet, tropical shores of Honolulu, Hawaii. It was here, thousands of miles away from the dictatorial morality clauses of Los Angeles, that the young actor finally had a moment to breathe his own air. Surrounded by the raw, unforgiving reality of military life, the heavy, glamorous mask he had been forced to wear simply melted away. Under the vast, starry Hawaiian sky, he experienced a profound, beautiful awakening. In the quiet solitude of those island nights, Farley began to deeply understand the true architecture of his own heart. Without the studio bosses whispering in his ear or threatening his family, he realized something incredibly powerful about himself. His soul did not fit into the rigid, prejudiced boxes that Hollywood demanded. He discovered a deep, natural attraction to both men and women. This was not a moment of scandalous rebellion or reckless indulgence. It was a quiet, elegant realization of his authentic self. For the very first time in his life, he looked at his own reflection and felt absolutely no shame. He recognized his own boundless capacity for love, and he embraced it with a pure, unburdened conscience. He finally knew exactly who he was. But vacations from reality never last forever. When the war ended, the golden cage was waiting for him. He returned to Hollywood a fundamentally changed man, carrying a profound secret in his heart. He knew who he was, but he also knew that revealing his true self would instantly destroy everything he had built for his family. He had to step right back into the suffocating illusion of the lavender dates and the highly publicized fake romances. Only this time, the internal psychological pressure was completely agonizing, because he finally knew what freedom tasted like. It was exactly in this fragile, agonizing state of mind that he crossed paths with a brilliant cinematic predator. Enter Alfred Hitchcock, the undisputed master of suspense. Hitchcock possessed a legendary, almost terrifying ability to look past a movie star's glamorous facade and see the dark, turbulent secrets hiding underneath. When Hitchcock looked at Farley Granger, he did not just see a breathtakingly handsome face to sell movie tickets. He saw a deeply sensitive soul vibrating with unspoken anxiety. He saw a man who knew exactly what it felt like to hide a fatal secret from the world. Hitchcock actively exploited that exact psychological vulnerability, turning Farley into his ultimate dark muse. He cast the young actor in two of his most brilliant and disturbing psychological thrillers, first in the chilling masterpiece Rope in 1948, and later in the legendary Strangers on a Train in 1951. In both of these iconic films, Farley was brilliantly cast as a man trapped in a terrifying web of guilt, carrying dark, unmentionable secrets that threatened to destroy his entire life. This was not just acting. Hitchcock was masterfully mining Farley's real-life internal torment. Every time the cameras rolled, Hitchcock pushed him to channel that suffocating fear, that paralyzing paranoia of being discovered and exposed by a hostile world. The sheer panic you see in Farley's eyes on screen was not entirely a performance. It was the very real exhaustion of a young man who was carrying the heavy, dangerous burden of a double life. Hitchcock essentially took Farley's deepest personal anxieties, his desperate need to please, his overwhelming fear of being unmasked, and projected them onto the silver screen for millions of people to consume. Farley delivered the greatest, most critically acclaimed performances of his entire career, but the emotional cost was unimaginably high. He was being celebrated globally for his incredible depth and vulnerability, while simultaneously being forced to lock his true identity away in a dark, hidden vault. He was Hollywood's perfect leading man, completely broken inside, shining the brightest, just as his own spirit was being quietly crushed. Farley Granger was not a typical Hollywood puppet. He had discovered his truth under the Hawaiian sky, and he refused to apologize for it. His heart was a complex, beautiful tapestry. He genuinely loved women, sharing passionate romances with some of the most stunning actresses of the Golden Age. But his soul was also profoundly moved by the brilliance of men. He fell deeply into intense, intellectual love affairs with musical genius Leonard Bernstein and the razor-sharp playwright Arthur Lawrence. He was a man who simply fell in love with a person's spirit, entirely blind to gender. But in 1950s Hollywood, living freely was an absolute crime. The studio system was a paranoid, breathing monster. They had hired fixers to track his every move. They did not just care about what happened in his bedroom. They rigidly controlled his entire social circle. Guilt by association was a very real, career-destroying weapon. The executives wanted him isolated, surrounded only by studio-approved starlets. They wanted a controllable, predictable asset, not a fiercely independent artist mingling with the intellectual elite. The suffocating pressure finally reached its absolute boiling point inside a cold, heavily guarded management office. Farley was suddenly summoned by the top studio brass. He walked into a room full of powerful executives who held his entire financial future in their hands. They looked at him and issued a direct, chilling ultimatum. They ordered him to immediately cut all ties and stop associating with his close friend, the legendary composer Aaron Copland. Copland was a brilliant man, but he was exactly the kind of free-thinking target the studios feared. The bosses fully expected Farley to simply nod his head, swallow his pride, and abandon his friend to protect his own multi-million-dollar career. After all, betraying your friends to survive was the standard currency in Hollywood. But they completely underestimated the fire burning inside Farley Granger. He was not just a pretty face. He was a man of profound, unshakable honor. To turn his back on a true friend simply because a group of greedy executives demanded it was entirely unthinkable to him. He looked at the most powerful men in the industry, the men who owned his contract and controlled his destiny, and his quiet, desperate need to please completely evaporated. The traumatized boy who used to hide from creditors was gone. In his place stood a man who had finally found his backbone. He looked them dead in the eye and fiercely yelled, "How dare you? How dare you tell me who my friends can be?" Without waiting for a single response, he turned his back on the stunned executives and stormed right out of the office. It was a breathtaking, incredibly dangerous moment of pure rebellion. In a cutthroat town where everyone happily stabbed each other in the back for a leading role, Farley chose absolute loyalty. He willingly risked the terrifying wrath of the entire studio system because his personal integrity and his devotion to his friends were simply not for sale. He drew a massive line in the sand. They could own his movie posters. They could stage his public dates. But they would absolutely never own his soul. Farley Granger had drawn his line in the sand, and the Hollywood machine did not take kindly to defiance. The studio bosses were absolutely furious. They expected the young actor to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness and his paycheck. But the fire inside Farley had already been ignited, and there was no putting it out. He looked at the scripts they were handing him, which were shallow, empty garbage designed solely to exploit his beautiful face and make a quick profit at the box office. For the first time in his entire life, he simply said no. He refused to be a mindless puppet anymore. The studio retaliated with brutal swiftness. They suspended him without pay. They cut off his income entirely, expecting to starve him into submission, hoping the terrifying fear of poverty would break his spirit and force him back into his golden cage. They thought he was nothing without their money and their spotlight. But they completely underestimated the human soul's desperate need for genuine freedom. Instead of surrendering to the relentless vortex of money and artificial fame, Farley made a choice that left the executives absolutely speechless. He packed his bags and walked away from the glittering, toxic empire of Los Angeles. He willingly abandoned the paychecks, the luxury, and the global adoration because he realized none of it was real. Accompanied by the brilliant playwright Arthur Lawrence, he crossed the ocean and escaped to Europe. For a young man who had spent his entire adult life suffocating under the heavy, oppressive weight of the studio system, stepping onto European soil felt like taking his very first breath of fresh air. It was a promised land far away from the flashing cameras, the blackmailing fixers, and the dictatorial morality clauses. Europe was not just a vacation, it was a profound spiritual detoxification. In Hollywood, Farley was treated as a highly insured piece of meat, a perfectly molded product with a barcode attached to his forehead. But Arthur Lawrence saw the beautiful, intelligent mind trapped inside the movie star facade. Arthur became his mentor, his guide, and his partner in a beautiful journey of cultural healing. Together they wandered through the ancient cobblestone streets of Paris, Rome, and London, leaving the shallow, plastic world of California far behind them. Arthur patiently stripped away the toxic programming of Hollywood and introduced Farley to the eternal, enduring values of true art. Imagine the breathtaking transition. One week he was being yelled at by greedy executives in a sterile office in California, and the next he was standing in silent awe before the magnificent masterpieces of the Louvre. Arthur taught him how to truly look at a painting, to understand the deep emotional strokes of the great masters. They spent their evenings sitting in grand, historic theaters, letting the overwhelming power of classic opera wash over them. They sat in small, dimly lit Parisian cafes for hours, passionately discussing literature, philosophy, and the true meaning of human existence. In Europe, no one cared about box office numbers or staged lavender dates. They cared about the depth of your soul and the richness of your mind. This cultural immersion was the ultimate antidote to the poisonous venom of the studio system. Hollywood had spent years constantly reminding Farley of his flaws, exploiting his deep-rooted insecurities from his impoverished childhood and making him believe he was absolutely worthless without their permission to exist. They had systematically convinced him that his only worth was his physical appearance. But amidst the timeless beauty of Europe, he began to heal those invisible scars. He absorbed the history, the stunning architecture, and the profound artistic legacy that had survived for centuries. He realized that a human being's true value is not measured by the size of their studio contract, the artificial roar of a red carpet crowd, or the amount of wealth they accumulate. True value is found in the quiet appreciation of art, the pursuit of profound knowledge, and the sheer bravery to live an authentic, unscripted life. Under the warm European sun, the terrified, traumatized boy who desperately needed to please everyone finally faded away forever. The heavy, suffocating chains of the morality clause dissolved into nothingness. Farley Granger reclaimed his stolen confidence. He discovered that he was not just a handsome face meant to be consumed by the masses. He was an artist, a thinker, and a free man. When he eventually looked back across the ocean at the glittering trap of Hollywood, he no longer felt fear. He only felt profound pity for the men still locked inside the cage. He had successfully traded the shallow, fleeting gold of the American film industry for the eternal, priceless peace of his own soul. 1,953 arrived with a heavy, suffocating tension. The standoff between Farley Granger and the all-powerful studio system had reached its absolute breaking point. Samuel Goldwyn and his army of ruthless executives were sitting comfortably in their ivory towers, waiting for the inevitable. They had used their favorite weapon. They had completely frozen his income. They confidently believed that a young man who had grown up terrified of eviction notices, running from debt collectors during the Great Depression, would eventually snap. They knew his deepest psychological scars. They calculated that the sheer, agonizing fear of returning to poverty would force him to crawl back to the golden cage, begging for forgiveness and a paycheck. In the cutthroat empire of Hollywood, money was the ultimate chain, and the studio bosses held the only key. Farley was standing at the most terrifying crossroads of his entire life. On one side was the absolute guarantee of massive wealth, global fame, and the luxurious lifestyle of a Hollywood king. All he had to do was apologize, put the heavy mask back on, and continue playing the flawless, straight-leading man for the cameras. On the other side was a terrifying, dark abyss of absolute financial ruin. To legally break his airtight 7-year contract, he would have to buy his own way out. The studio demanded a completely astronomical sum of money to let him go. It was a ransom carefully designed to bankrupt him. For a man whose entire childhood was defined by financial trauma, writing that check meant willingly stepping back into the exact nightmare he had spent his whole life trying to escape. The pressure was entirely crushing. It was in this moment of agonizing hesitation that the brilliant playwright Arthur Lawrence looked him directly in the eyes and delivered a chilling, unforgettable truth. Arthur did not sugarcoat the brutal reality of the situation. He told Farley plainly and fiercely, "If you stay, you will die inside. If you pay, you will be broke, but you will be free." Those words hung in the air like a heavy cinematic silence. It was the ultimate test of human character. What is the actual price of a human soul? How much does dignity cost? Farley had to decide right then and there if the terrified little boy hiding from debt collectors was still running his life, or if he had finally become a man who valued his own honor more than a bank statement. The day of the final meeting felt like walking into an execution chamber. Farley walked into Samuel Goldwyn's massive, intimidating office. The executives were sitting behind their grand, polished mahogany desks, radiating arrogant confidence. They fully expected a broken, defeated actor ready to surrender to the machine. They waited for the apology. But Farley did not lower his head. He did not ask for his career back. Instead, in a breathtaking moment of absolute, unyielding defiance, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook. The room fell entirely silent. With a steady hand, he wrote out the massive, staggering amount they demanded to buy out the remainder of his contract. He literally drained his own life savings. He handed over an absolute fortune, entirely bankrupting himself in the process. The studio bosses were absolutely paralyzed with shock. In the entire greedy, manipulative history of Hollywood, they had never witnessed anything like this. They were completely programmed to believe that every single person had a price. They simply could not comprehend a human being who would look at a mountain of gold and willingly set it on fire just to breathe his own air. By signing that piece of paper, Farley Granger committed the ultimate act of rebellion. He took their most terrifying weapon, the threat of poverty, the fear of the blacklist, the loss of fame, and he completely disarmed it. He walked out of those heavy studio gates, leaving his entire fortune behind on a wooden desk. He stepped onto the Los Angeles streets with absolutely nothing left in his pockets. He was completely broke, stripped of his Hollywood crown, and entirely erased from the studio payroll. But as he looked up at the California sky, for the very first time in his entire life, he was absolutely untouchable. He was free. When Farley Granger walked out of those heavy studio gates with absolutely nothing left in his bank account, the powerful executives of Los Angeles laughed. They genuinely believed they had just witnessed a career suicide. In their arrogant minds, an actor without a studio contract was a dead man walking. They confidently predicted that he would fade into absolute obscurity, completely forgotten by the public within a single year. They waited for the desperate phone call. They waited for him to come crawling back on his hands and knees, begging for a crumb of his former glory just to pay his bills. But that phone call never came. There is an old, profound Eastern philosophy that says heaven never completely cuts off the path for anyone who possesses true courage. When you willingly walk away from a fake, artificial light, you finally give yourself the chance to become your own sun. And that is exactly what Farley did. He did not crawl into a dark corner to wither away and die in shame. He rose from the ashes of his shattered Hollywood career like an absolute phoenix. Instead of staying in an industry that treated him like a highly insured piece of property, Farley packed his bags and headed to a place where true art was fiercely worshipped. He traveled to Italy. He left behind the shallow, plastic sets of California and stepped into the rich, deeply cinematic world of European filmmaking. He caught the attention of the legendary, visionary Italian director Luchino Visconti. Visconti was entirely different from the greedy, controlling studio bosses back in America. He did not care about fabricated lavender dates, vicious gossip magazines, or the toxic, suffocating morality clauses. He only cared about raw, unfiltered, burning talent. Visconti boldly cast Farley in his sweeping historical cinematic masterpiece, Senso. This was not a cheap, manufactured studio movie designed simply to sell popcorn and popcorn to teenagers. This was profound high art. On the breathtaking, historic sets of Italy, Farley was finally treated with the absolute respect he had always deserved as an artist. He was no longer a pretty puppet on a tightly pulled string. He was a serious, dramatic actor given the immense freedom to deeply explore the darkest, most complex corners of human emotion. His performance in Senso was an absolute revelation. He proved to the entire world, and more importantly to his own wounded spirit, that his talent was completely real. He proved that he never actually needed the Hollywood machine to shine. The machine had desperately needed him. But his glorious, defiant rebirth did not stop in Europe. Armed with a newly forged sense of absolute confidence and unshakable self-worth, Farley eventually returned to the United States. But he did not return to the suffocating palm trees and the fake smiles of Los Angeles. He went straight to the gritty, beating heart of real, unadulterated acting. He went to New York City. The streets of New York were a universe away from the velvet-lined prisons of the studio system. Here, an actor could not hide behind millions of dollars of studio marketing, soft camera lighting, or heavily edited film cuts. You either had the raw, undeniable talent to command a live audience, or you were eaten alive on stage. Farley completely threw himself into the incredibly demanding, terrifying world of live theater. He stepped onto the legendary, unforgiving stages of Broadway, breathing the exact same air as the audience, performing without a safety net or a second take, and he absolutely conquered it. He delivered gripping, powerful performances night after night, earning the genuine, hard-won respect of the toughest, most cynical theater critics in the world. He also seamlessly transitioned into the rapidly exploding medium of live television drama, proving his incredible versatility as a fiercely dedicated working artist. He was no longer just a handsome face plastered on a teenager's bedroom wall. He was a deeply respected working actor who had completely seized control of his own destiny. This is the ultimate, triumphant revenge against a cruel system that tried to break his spirit and own his soul. By walking away from the massive fortune and the suffocating golden cage, Farley Granger achieved something that most Hollywood idols only ever dream of. He achieved absolute, untouchable authenticity. He proved that when you boldly step completely out of your comfort zone, when you refuse to compromise your own human dignity for a paycheck, you do not lose yourself. You actually find the true version of yourself that was always meant to exist. He traded the fake, heavily manufactured glow of Hollywood for a completely genuine, fiercely independent life. And in doing so, he won the greatest, most important victory of his entire life. There is a dark, undeniable curse that seems to hang over the golden age of Hollywood. If you look closely at the incredibly beautiful men who were forced into those suffocating glass cages, the ending is almost always a heartbreaking tragedy. The crushing weight of living a constant lie, hiding your true self from the world, and constantly fearing exposure usually led to a very dark path. Look at the breathtaking Montgomery Clift, who tried to numb the agonizing pain of his hidden life with relentless alcohol and prescription pills, slowly destroying his own body until his heart simply gave out. Look at the ultimate leading man, Rock Hudson, who played the perfect straight husband on screen for decades, only to suffer a terrifying, lonely death, while the very industry that profited millions off his face turned its back on him. They were absolute kings of the silver screen who had all the money and fame in the world, but they died profoundly broken and tragically alone. But Farley Granger completely broke the Hollywood curse. By sacrificing his massive studio fortune and walking away from the blinding artificial lights, he actually managed to save his own life. The ultimate reward for his incredible bravery was not a Golden Academy Award or a hollow star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. His reward was something far more valuable and incredibly rare in the entertainment industry. It was absolute, genuine peace. In the 1960s, far away from the toxic, manipulating grip of the studio executives, Farley found his ultimate safe harbor. He met a brilliant television producer named Robert Calhoun. This was not a fake lavender date staged for the paparazzi. There were no studio fixers calculating their every move, and no flashing cameras documenting their dinners. It was simply two men falling deeply, quietly, and authentically in love. In an industry where marriages were treated as disposable business contracts and genuine loyalty was practically non-existent, Farley and Robert built a beautiful, unshakable life together. They did not have to hide in dark basements or speak in coded language to survive. They shared a warm home, they shared their artistic dreams, and they shared an incredibly profound devotion that lasted for 45 beautiful years. Imagine the absolute triumph of that. 45 years of waking up next to the person you truly love without a single ounce of fear or shame. They stayed fiercely by each other's side through the absolute highs and the devastating lows, proving that genuine love always outlasts artificial fame. Farley remained entirely devoted to Robert until the very end, holding his hand when Robert peacefully passed away in 2008. 3 years later, in 2011, Farley Granger took his own final breath in his quiet, beloved New York City apartment. He was 85 years old. He did not die a lonely, forgotten, tragic figure consumed by the toxic secrets of his youth. He died as a profoundly fulfilled man who had lived an incredibly rich, authentic life. He had tasted the absolute pinnacle of global stardom and realized it was completely hollow. He chose to empty his bank account to buy back his soul, and that daring choice paid off in the most beautiful way imaginable. The story of Farley Granger is a powerful, timeless testament to the absolute value of human integrity. It proves that all the box office millions, all the screaming fans, and all the glamorous magazine covers in the world cannot buy a single night of peaceful sleep. The sweet, ultimate fruit of being brutally honest with yourself is a quiet mind and a full heart. Farley Granger looked at the ultimate Hollywood illusion, saw the deadly trap hiding underneath, and bravely chose to walk away into the reality of true love. And because he dared to lose everything, he actually ended up winning it all. They called him the ultimate symbol of love on the silver screen. But ironically, the greatest, most flawless, and most agonizing role of his entire life was not captured on celluloid. For years, it was the role of a straight man, performed 24/7 under the crushing weight of the Hollywood studio system. The executives tried to buy his youth. They tried to buy his smile, and ultimately, they tried to strip away his fundamental right to simply be a human being. Audiences wept over his beautiful romantic movies, but few ever knew that his only real tears fell in a dead, silent room long after the flashbulbs had died, when he was desperately trying to figure out how to simply be himself. But Farley Granger refused to let that silent, lonely room be his final chapter. He became a true pioneer in a town built entirely on fear and compliance. By signing that massive check and deliberately bankrupting himself to buy his own freedom, he did something that completely changed the landscape of the Golden Age. He proved once and for all that human dignity has no price tag. He walked away from the artificial lights of Los Angeles and found his own genuine sun. But his incredible story of survival does not end with just his own personal freedom. It ends with a profound, beautiful mystery about the invisible threads of destiny that connect human souls. When Farley was at his absolute lowest point, when he was suspended by the studio and completely suffocating under the pressure, it was the brilliant playwright Arthur Lawrence who threw him a lifeline. Arthur was the one who took him across the ocean to Europe. Arthur was the one who patiently washed away the toxic poison of Hollywood, teaching him how to appreciate true art, literature, and his own immeasurable self-worth. Even though their romantic relationship eventually shifted into a profound lifelong friendship, and Farley spent 45 beautiful years with his partner Robert Calhoun, the deep spiritual bond between Farley and Arthur never truly broke. In the ancient mystical philosophies of the East, there is a deep belief in the concept of true soulmates. These are not just passing romantic partners, but twin souls bound together by an invisible thread of destiny across time and space. They are two halves of a spiritual whole who save each other in their darkest hours. And the universe seemed to honor that profound, unbreakable bond at the very end of their journey. On the 27th of March 2011, Farley Granger closed his eyes for the final time and peacefully passed away at the age of 85. He left this world as a completely free man, surrounded by love and a lasting legacy of absolute authenticity. But the story was not quite finished. Exactly 6 weeks later, on the 5th of May 2011, Arthur Lawrence took his final breath. It was a hauntingly beautiful cinematic ending to a story that defied all the rules. It was as if Arthur, the man who had bravely guided Farley out of the darkness of Hollywood half a century earlier, simply waited just long enough to make sure his soulmate had safely crossed over before following him into the light. They beat the ruthless system. They completely outlived the dictatorial studio bosses who tried to control them. And in the end, those two brave souls reunited in a place where no morality clauses, no flashing cameras, and no societal judgments could ever reach them again. They left behind a historical love and a profound legacy that will echo through the ages. True freedom is never given by those in power. It is bravely taken. And true love, whether romantic or spiritual, is the only thing we actually get to take with us when we go. If Farley Granger's incredible journey of defiance and spiritual connection moved you today, please leave a like on this video and hit that subscribe button right now to join our community. The glittering facade of Hollywood's golden age is built on a very dark foundation of deeply buried secrets, and we are just getting started. In our next video, we are pulling back the heavy velvet curtain on another legendary icon, a massive global superstar whose tragic, desperate double life was aggressively covered up by the very studio system that eventually destroyed him. It is a chilling story of manipulation and betrayal that the Hollywood elites hoped would stay buried forever. You absolutely will not want to miss it. Subscribe now, and I will see you in the next dark chapter.